Добрый день, уважаемые участники.
Good day, dear participants of the 10th Jubilee Central Asian Trade Forum. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Asin Musagalieva. I am the head of the component GIZ component project, and today I have an honor to moderate and prepare this panel session, which is today be discussing important issues between private and public sector dialogue in the sphere of simplifying trade and policies. And before we proceed with the actual session, I would like to announce some technical issues. So we will be recording all our discussions, and all the participants of the forum and today's panel session will have a chance to watch all the records of today's discussion and the other discussions at the forum site and also at the YouTube channel. And links to both forum and YouTube channel you can see at our chat box. Also, all participants of today's panel session during presentations and during panelists' presentations, the sound will be off, but you can actually comment, or you can actually type your questions in this Q&A box you can see at the bottom of the screen. If you have a Zoom application uploaded onto your computer, for those of you who actually use the Zoom application, you can utilize simultaneous interpretation. At the bottom, you can see a little globe sign, and you can click on the language which is it's more comfortable for you to listen to the presentations in. So we provide simultaneous interpretation. I can see that people started writing comments, introducing themselves, so I'm very glad that you use all the functions of the Zoom application. First of all, I would like to welcome you on behalf of GIZ. It's International Cooperation Society, and also on behalf of the Transport and Logistics Partnership of Central Asia. Since these two organizations, we are organizers and moderators of this panel session. Also, I would like to thank USAID for this opportunity to, in previous years, for an opportunity to discuss transport and logistics issues in the framework of this forum. Today we will have a good opportunity to discuss a role and importance of private sector and public sector in the sphere of simplification of trade issues, and talk about the national committees creation, which are the main, or establishment, which is the main platform for members of the World Trade Organization and for implementation of agreements on simplified trade rules. And today we will have an opportunity to discuss very important issue of regional cooperation within the framework of the Central Asian region and in other neighboring countries of Asia on the issues of trade procedure simplification, committee interaction, participation of the involving private sector in those processes, and we will have a good opportunity to hear about international experience or experience of other countries, approaches they use to implement the agreement itself, and the instruments which are involved in the private-public dialogue. We invited international experts to participate, International Trade Center, our partners, who will actually share their vision, their experience, and their opinion, how we can interact, cooperate, and how we can improve interaction, and how it can help us in our work. So I would like to mention that recent events happening in the world, which have to do with pandemics, led us to the understanding that cooperation plays a very important role in, and this opportunity we have today within the framework of this panel session to discuss and receive your comments or your suggestions will give us an opportunity to think more and come to some joint sort of ideas or agreements how we can improve or facilitate our cooperation in the sphere of transport and logistics. As moderator, I would like to thank our speakers, our international experts, and our partners from private sector. For us, it's a good indicator of their interests and desire of both our partners from private and public sector and from international society too, and cooperate in this sort of sphere. So not to take more of your time, I would like to announce that today we will have four main speakers, panelists, and who will talk about their vision on the topics I mentioned. And for the first sort of discussion or presentation, I would like to ask Mr. Paul Hansen, who is the chief of the UNISTAD from Trade Facilitation Division, who could share their international experience of how national committees should operate, what is the role of the private sector, and which benefits we can see from joint cooperation. Please, Paul, the floor is yours.
I will speak a little bit about national trade facilitation committees, the experience that we have in UNCTAD working with national trade facilitation committees around the world. And I'm sure that my colleagues that will speak subsequently will have other experience, other information that will be beneficial for the participants in this seminar today. So let me try and start without any further ado. When we are looking at national trade facilitation committees and trade facilitation in general, I mean, why are we working towards trade facilitation? Why do we want to facilitate trade? It's to a large extent because we believe that we can make international trade, cross-border trade more efficient. We can make it less burdensome. So what businesses want, and in a way it's pretentious of me to speak about what businesses want, being from an international organization, but from the experience that we have, what businesses want is predictability. They want to know what they should do. They want to reduce the costs as much as possible for procedures. They want to facilitate the connectivity. So having connectivity from one country to another in order to make the transaction as easy as possible. They want to be part of the process of deciding on trade facilitation. They want to have a voice, so to say. And at the end of the day, they want results. They want a result at the bottom line, and that is what is important. So this is to a large extent what businesses want. Now, you could also talk about what national authorities, governments want out of trade facilitation. There are a number of issues making things more efficient as well. But all governments, of course, are also under pressure for reducing cost, do more with less, and therefore using trade facilitation also is beneficial for governments in order to make a lot of these processes easier. And that is exactly what the trade facilitation approach is focusing on. So traditionally, there are a number of issues that we look at when we look at trade facilitation. Increase transparency, make simplifications, so make it simpler to carry out the trade across borders, standardize the processes, so to make the processes unified, and harmonize the way we are doing things between countries. And those can be done through a number of key principles, primarily through modernization and through collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. And I think these two last issues are some of the issues that you will see reoccurring when we are talking about trade facilitation and how we can do this between the public and the private sector, modernize, automate, digitalize, collaborate between the parties. In the context of international legal instruments and international guidelines, when we are talking about national trade facilitation committees, this has really only come to the forefront with the entry into force of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. In that agreement, in Article 23.2, it says that each member shall establish and or maintain a national committee on trade facilitation to facilitate domestic coordination and implementation of the provisions of the Trade Facilitation Agreement. Nothing more is said in the agreement about the Trade Facilitation Committee, so that leaves a lot to be decided at national level. However, there is some indication on how the traders or the business sector can interact, and that is mentioned in Article 2, where it says that each member shall, to the extent possible, and in a manner consistent with its domestic laws and legal systems, provide opportunities and an appropriate time period for traders and other interested parties to comment on proposed legislation and rules and regulation. So there is a provision in Article 1.2 on the possibility for business to comment. And in Article 2.2, it says each member shall, as appropriate, provide regular consultations between border agencies and traders. So those two mentions in Article 2 indicates a bit about how the business sector can interact and also interact within the National Trade Facilitation Committee. Now, National Trade Facilitation Committees have existed before the Trade Facilitation Agreement, and we have over time, UNCTAD and other organizations collected good practices on how these committees work and can work. So here are in bullet point a number of issues that I think are relevant to the well-functioning of national trade facilitation committees. First of all, it is important that there is political support, political leadership, and that there is a champion for the National Trade Facilitation Committee work in any country. So whether that's the Minister of Trade, whether that's the Prime Minister's office, it is really depending on the national situation, but without political support, the National Committee will not be able to function and be sustainable. So political support from the top is important. Secondly, private sector needs to be involved. It is not enough that the public sector sits around the table and discusses trade facilitation issues. Most of us that are bureaucrats do not know how it works in the real life, and therefore we need to have the issues that are really pressing for the private sector on the table, discuss these together, and find solutions jointly. Certainly, we see from experience in countries where this is done that a joint chairmanship, principally and preferably between the public sector and the private sector, works very well. So if you have a chairmanship of a national trade facilitation committee, it could on the one hand be somebody from the public sector, from customs, from Ministry of Trade or Commerce, and somebody from the private sector, for instance, from the Chamber of Commerce. This shows to everybody that there is a dedication to public-private partnership. The next point, structurally, national trade facilitation committees need to be set up in a logical structure, and you will see on the right of this slide, here is an outline for a 3-tier level of how a national trade facilitation committee could be set up and be operational. At the top, there is the strategic level or policy level, meeting maybe once a year or twice a year, giving political and strategic directions. The mid-level is the operational level, what many of us traditionally look at as a trade facilitation committee. These committees meet maybe every 2-3 months and decides on the operational issues and discusses how the, for instance, trade facilitation agreement is being implemented. And the last level is the ad hoc level or working group level, where you discuss technical issues, and you can set up various groups, for instance, on single window or authorized operator or the COVID crisis, and discuss very concrete technical issues. All of the flow of the information and the decision goes from the technical level through the operational level to the strategic level, and the policy directions goes in the other direction from the top and down to operational and technical level. So this could be a good practice of how to set up a committee. The next point, what I call committee reform and alignment, is important. National trade facilitation committees in many countries are new, but there were already existing committees. There are committees in the area of transport, there are committees in other areas. And we see that there is a risk that there are too many committees dealing with the same issues. And therefore it is important at national level to really focus on trying to align these committees, aligning their mandates, their work, and also clearly defining the mandate of the Trade Facilitation Committee. Is it narrow, meaning do you only look at the WTO and how this is implemented? Or do you have a mandate that's larger, that for instance include transport facilitation, other trade facilitation issues? This needs to be clearly defined and defined in an overall governmental approach, also with other committees. The next point is the issue of sustainability of the Trade Facilitation Committee. Is there, first of all, political support? Is there a secretariat that is supported, have sufficient resources to actually support the committee? Is there a budget for the committee? These are important elements. Who is the government agency that is leading the work on the Trade Facilitation Committee? Is it one government agency? Is it several government agencies in collaboration? Does the private sector also contribute? And that comes into the next point. How does the private sector contribute? Is it in kind, for instance, with personnel? Do they make a financial contribution? Do they put meeting rooms at the disposal or offices at the disposal of the committee? All of these things are important to discuss and define together with the private sector. Very importantly is that the work of the committee is result-oriented. It is not very conducive, and there will be no results if you just meet once every 3 months, have a few discussions, there is no follow-up, there is no concrete work being done on the issues that are raised. So therefore, having a results matrix, having a work plan following up, and as the next point, monitoring what you are doing very closely is extremely important, so that you can report to the stakeholders what is being done about the issues that are being raised. You can report to the policy level, these and these issues have been raised, we have been able to deal with these and these issues and come up with solutions. So results oriented, having a work plan and monitoring this work goes together. And then finally, on the issues that I would like to mention, how to work in a consultative approach. The committee is a very good vehicle for doing consultations with all the stakeholders, both the public sector and the private sector. So in that respect, I would suggest that whenever you have a committee meeting, you have a clear agenda structure. In that agenda, there is a standing point on consultation. Various agencies or the private sector can raise issues, can raise new proposals, and have a discussion with the other stakeholders to get feedback. That agency can then go back to further work before any legislation is being proposed. This is a very conducive way of working in the National Trade Facilitation Committee. And then also when new legislation has been introduced, to validate how this is working, have a sounding board with the National Trade Facilitation Committee. So these are some of the lessons learned and good practices we have seen. Now, there is certainly during the COVID crisis, a whole host of issues where the National Trade Facilitation Committee has in a way suffered, and we have seen. There has been a clear lack of a defined role in many countries of the national committees vis-a-vis emergency COVID task forces. Emergency issues are often dealt with at political level, and in many cases, NTFCs are considered purely technical. As we have seen in the past slide, this is not the case, and therefore we would argue that national trade facilitation committees should have a clear role. There has been an absence of guidelines on teleworking, lack of connectivity, lack of coordination, and absence of a national base of focal points in the COVID crisis in many countries. And that has led to the fact that in many countries, national trade facilitation committees have not been as involved in solving the COVID crisis as we believe that they could and as we believe they should. A number of issues are important to address the COVID crisis, and we believe that the National Trade Facilitation Committees can play an important role here. We have 4 main areas: process optimization, cost reduction, transparency, and use of technology. In all of these areas, all of the stakeholders that are in the National Trade Facilitation Committee can contribute to the aftermath of the COVID crisis and the follow-up. So we believe that sincerely the committees have an important role to what you call build back better, to have a better solution after the COVID crisis. And some of these issues that needs to be addressed for National Trade Facilitation Committee in recovery and preparing for future crises is increased political commitment on trade facilitation, increased visibility at national level for NTFCs. It is important that NTFCs also communicate with the outside world what they are doing, and NTFCs working as one, meaning that they have the right tools. There is a committee reform and alignment, and also that there is a link between national trade facilitation committees at national level and what's being done at regional levels. We also see at regional level, it is important to establish regional trade facilitation committees to, within the region, actually have discussions and information sharing. It is important to create interconnectivity in regions, and national trade facilitation committees can be instrumental for this. In the Asia-Pacific region, one of the ways of creating interconnectivity is through the new UN-ESCAP framework agreement facilitating cross-border paperless trade. Involving and appointing transit coordinators in a crisis situation is extremely important. We firmly believe that having transit coordinators appointed on a permanent basis, having the transit coordinators being part of the National Trade Facilitation Committee can assist in the solving many of the transit problems that are also under the auspices of the National Trade Facilitation Committee. And then again, align the regional and sub-regional activities with national activities. I will end by a couple of slides on just explaining what it is that UNCTAD is providing to national trade facilitation committees, the tools that we are offering to work with countries and committees. First of all, our so-called empowerment program for national trade facilitation committees. These are intensive training courses. Now we have launched what we call blended or hybrid courses, where we have online training, we have webinars, and when we start being able to travel again, we have in-country seminars. This is for the members of the committees and the secretariat, and this is based on a certification that we do then with the National Trade Facilitation Committee and the members. One of the outcomes of this work is roadmaps for National Trade Facilitation Committee. I know that many of the countries in the region are working with some of the participants, participating organizations here today on similar approaches. We have in UNCTAD an online database on national trade facilitation committees. You will see at the bottom of the page the link to this page. I would like to invite all of the participating countries here to visit this page, visit and see if your country is represented on this database. If not, you can contact us and we will make sure with you that you have your information represented in the online database. And also if you are represented already, the information there to ensure that it is updated and we can then do this together. We also do every 2 years a study on national trade facilitation committees, and you can access that also through the link at the bottom of the page. This provides analysis of a questionnaire that we are doing and will give some indications of how national trade facilitation committees are working around the world. We have a program of assisting countries with national trade portals. I know that in Central Asian countries, ITC is a partner in this and are rolling out the trade portals very successfully, I believe. And I think Pierre, maybe when he intervenes, have more information about this. And the last slide I would like to mention is a new product that we are launching, what we call the Reform Tracker. This is a monitoring tool for national trade facilitation committees, whereby committees digitally automated can do monitoring and evaluation of the implementation work that they are doing. And this really is meant at capacitating and professionalizing the national trade facilitation committees. If any countries are interested, they can contact us and we can see how we can use these tools at national level. So this is all I would like to say as an introductory remark. There are a number of issues how the private sector can be better at working within the auspices of the National Trade Facilitation Committees. I think Pierre in his intervention have a number of guidelines or hints how this can be done. And I think this is extremely important in order to have the private sector participate in a constructive way in national trade facilitation and ensure that the work of national trade facilitation committees is optimal. So thank you very much so far, and I'm happy to take any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hansen, for this interesting presentation. And it's very timely because, as you know, in the countries of Central Asia, and some countries already have this national trade facilitation committees, and the recommendations or the main points that you highlighted are already used in the country, but there is still a need to improve the work of national trade facilitation committees. But I think for our partners, and for the national committees, it will be very useful to continue. It would make sense and would be very useful for us to continue working with this and all the materials that you're offering to use or suggest that we use with UNICAD. We should also consider those. And I think in this case, we will be able to continue to work together to be able to help our partners and in the work of this committee and involve the private sector. Thank you very much. And I would also like to once again reiterate that you can ask questions or comment or give your comments in the chat box. Please do so and write your questions, write your responses, ask questions, and we will be able to ask them at the end of the session and discuss them with our panelists. As was mentioned by Mr. Hansen, the role of the private sector is extremely important in these committees, and that's why we invited, and who is also the organizer of this session today, is the Partnership on Transportation and Logistics in Central Asia. This is one of the main and active participants of the trade processes in the region. I'm happy to have Larisa Kistikova with us today, who is the chairman of this partnership. She is our main partner on simplification of trade processes in Central Asia, and I think that Larisa will, I hope that she will share her experience or the experience of the private sector in Central Asia and what they use in order to promote their issues, their interests, and to find solutions to their challenges. Larisa, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Asel. Just give me a second, I need to open the presentation. Here we go. Good afternoon, dear participants. Good afternoon, dear colleagues and partners. It's a great pleasure for me to see you all here at this forum, although online, but I still have a feeling that you're here. I feel your support. It's a great pleasure for me to say that our partnership is a child of this Central Asian Trade Forum. We were created as part of this forum, and we grew up together with this forum. Today, we've grown up, and we are presenting ourselves as a full-fledged structure. And it's a great pleasure for us to realize that our partnership and the Central Asian Trade Forum, we're two parts of one big thing. The objectives and goals of our partnership are, what are we? Well, our activities are aimed at development of the regional partnership and collaboration in transport and logistics in order to contribute to promotion of trade and at the same time to simplify the procedures. We are closely interrelated. Our countries are closely interrelated to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. It's a great pleasure to see Tajikistan joining us. Turkmenistan joining us. Our partnership and our network is expanding. We, as was from the very start, we're not a legal entity yet, but we still pose objectives to make sure that the legal framework exists. And this is a regional professional dialogue platform of the forum that unites national transportation partnerships of 4 countries. We communicate, we get together, we discuss, we debate, and we detect problems to be able to understand what problems the region is facing and to be able to solve those problems on the national level. And today, a lot of members of this transportation logistics partnership are permanent members of national committees on a facilitation of trade. So the private-public dialogue is being promoted at all levels, and we coordinate in different arrangements to simplify the trade. So this is a realistic platform that has demonstrated itself that it demonstrated and proved its effectiveness. This is how we work, this organizational scheme. Twice a year, we have expanded meetings where we meet in one of the countries of Central Asia with support of our partners, including GIZ and TFC and USAID. These are the 2 partners that were at the inception of this partnership, and for all these years they've been supporting us. During these extended meetings, we talk about problems that exist in transit, in crossing the borders, during border crossings, problems that exist in the legal frames of our countries, which and the legislations which are not harmonized amongst themselves, which presents challenges in transportation of shipments. And once we detect those problems, we understand that they have a regional significance. We conduct an analysis and we analyze national legislations. We work out the registrations, optimization of certain procedures, and harmonizing them in the region. And with that regards, our partners are of great help to us. Once we've conducted the analytical work and we have specific suggestions, we consider these issues at the national level, at the NTFC level, with the NTFCs within the existing technical working groups and other consulting bodies where certain issues are being discussed and suggested for discussion at different other platforms. Once these issues are considered at national levels, there's the coordination that takes place, decisions are taken, regulatory acts are developed and adopted so that they are harmonized with the recommendations which were given at the regional level. Once at the national level, all these issues have been coordinated and agreed on. We present results at different regional events, such as the Central Asian Trade Forum, different roundtables, which we conduct in order to demonstrate the results of our work. If we look at the venue of the TLP within the committees on trade facilitation committees, you can see that we are a member of the working groups. We also represent in working groups of other public councils and boards, and we contact chambers of commerce and industry. And for example, in Kazakhstan, we're members of the Atamiken, which is the National Chamber of Entrepreneurs. So we're represented at different platforms that allow us to set up and create a mechanism of PPP and PPD, private-public dialogue. I'm just going to give you an example of two countries to show how actively the private sector is represented in NTFCs. And these are two examples, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. We have a similar number of representatives of business and government, 12 from each. In Tajikistan, for example, out of 12 business representatives, 1/3 are individual entrepreneurs. By that, we mean commercial companies and a private sector that is represented by the industry. So 1/3 are big companies and 1/3 are NGOs. As for rotation, in Tajikistan, it happens at least once a year. So one business representative to one government representative. Within our committee, we have the rotation procedures and rules, and depending on the issues that are to be discussed in the next year, depending on the focus, we're accepting applications from the private sector, and at a meeting, we make a decision. Or we accept and allow a certain representatives to be on the board or to be in the committee, and maybe let out somebody go. For example, those who are not interested to continue participating, and maybe the focus is not in the area. As for Kyrgyzstan, for example, by the end of the year, we will change the composition of the board, and we will include new representatives from the public and the private sector. And so this is also where we use the rotation mechanism. As for governance, the chairman is Minister of Economic Development and Trade, and in Kyrgyzstan is the Minister of Economy. As for co-chairman, this is an interesting thing. Kyrgyzstan is the only country where the co-chairman is a private sector, is a representative from a private sector. He is the head of the Suppliers Association. This is a very important thing. In Tajikistan, the deputy chairman is the head of the customs service at the government of the republic. So that's the format which we use for our committees. And we have very good experience, and I'm just going to speak for Tajikistan. The private sector takes part in generating the agenda of NTFCs. We also had experience when we formed one agenda, and the whole meeting was, during the meeting we were discussing transportation and transit issues, where we discussed a lot of problems, and the results of that meeting as a result of that meeting, we have a new automobile transportation code that was initiated by the private sector and supported by the government. So this experience is very good in Central Asia in terms of and with respect to participation and involvement of the private sector's involvement, and that could be rolled out to other countries as an example. So what are the results of the partnership within NTFCs? There are several large studies and works that we conducted, results of which I would like to share with you. First of all, we conducted the analysis of the legal framework of international automobile transportations in the Central Asian region. We determined over general and common legislation issues and problems that are constantly, regularly being discussed at NTFCs. We also analyzed the cargo shipments in the region, and this is a big problem in the country, which each country, when they transit, they experience incompetitiveness because the weight and dimension requirements are different in different countries. And this issue was also brought up, and we came up with recommendations in terms of harmonization of those dimension requirements, and we discussed it at the regional level, at the regional workshop with ministers of transportation in Central Asia, which supported this area, this suggestions. And today, in the Republic of Tajikistan, for example, they have already prepared a draft resolution on changing our legislation pertaining to harmonization of it with those of our regional neighbors.
So the issues of the accepting international weight certificate. And also we performed an analysis of actual agreement of Cholponata International and International Convention, where we presented of all our recommendations and discussed with Ministries of Transport of Central Asia. Upon the results of this analysis and proposals, Kyrgyz Republic already submitted for their approval the revision to accept these proposals, and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, we are in the process of. We are a little bit late with this issue, but in the nearest time, we will also make a decision in terms of applying and accepting certificates. All these issues are raised at different levels, discussed at different platforms, and there was a recent meeting on SPECA program within the framework of SPECA program. You all know this working group. There was a meeting on working group on trade where all reps of ministries of Central Asian countries raised the issues on multi-weighing of these vehicles and accepting the international weight certificate. Also, we perform monitoring of transit corridors for export of the agricultural products. We did it in 2017, and the last one in August-September 2020, which was discussed at the platform during the meeting of the regional and national committees on trade facilitation. Monitoring was presented, stated the positive events in comparison with 2017 in spite of COVID pandemics, and the situation is a bit complicated. But many elements of best practices are being applied by our countries, and we have something to be boast of, but we also have bottlenecks which have to be overcome. All these issues we plan to present at the technical meeting of the regional committee, national committee, to discuss it in greater detail. So, research of new transit routes. In 2019, upon the initiative of the private sector, with the support of the public sector, in particular Ministry of Transport, so we have did a dry run between China, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. We looked at the new routes, access routes through Tajikistan to China. And this corridor, we can so Afghanistan can join this corridor. So why do we need this new corridors? The pandemic had shown that the closure of borders, ban to transit through some countries, it leads to the search of new routes. and we try to do the same monitoring, through Kurik port, Aktau port, through Kazakhstan, through sea, and further to Turkey. So because many of our transporters used to use those routes, they were transporting goods through Turkmenistan, and some new things like ferries, schedule for ferry, the cost of the transportation. We wanted to ask our logistics companies to adapt to the searching for new routes. Also, we are implementing a new route through Afghanistan with the access to Turkmenistan and Iran. 10-15 vehicles use this route. So we are starting to look for alternatives routes to simplify access to seaports. Promotion of private-public dialogue through national committees. As our speaker had mentioned, within the framework of pandemic, our national committees did not work things out. Many things which could have been resolved through our committees, unfortunately, we failed to do such things. There were no meetings of the committees in our countries, and there's issues like the test acceptance for transit shipments, border closure. Like one country closes the border, the other country didn't on the other side. There was failure to notify, so these instruments which could actually which could have been worked out fast through these committees, we have to take lessons learned. Then transport documents like Dazvali. So we discussed with Ministry of Transport of region, which supported this initiative, a digitalization of the permitting documents, because sometimes we lack these forms. So sometimes they're not delivered in timely. So that is why the ministry supported us to actually digitize these transport documents, and we are trying, with the support of our transport specialists, to run the pilot project to use digital documents. These are some bigger issues which we actually focused on. Next year we will promote this work, and we will focus on more specific issues. Besides, our partnership expands cooperation with regional and national institutes and involvement of other countries into our activity. First of all, we expanded cooperation with SPECA program. We plan to, within the framework of this work, because not only Central Asian countries are members of this program, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, we plan to be using our platform to create this business council in order to involve other countries for their successful resolution. It's very nice to mention the involvement of Turkmenistan in the partnership activity. Two big associations are members of our partnership, and during pandemic, our meetings, which we organized, of different working groups and social networks to exchange information, because you do understand, and we talked about this many times, that the access to information is still very low. There is no uniform source of information where we could receive it. And within the framework of our groups, we are talking about the new things, new provisions, new orders of the governments, like the protective measures, what are the problems. So our Turkmeni colleagues helped us a lot in terms of the fact that Turkmenistan was closed for transit, for for international transportation companies, so we could actually promote this or facilitate these issues. So also we established cooperation with Global Alliance of the Cold Chain. So we plan to strengthen our cooperation. That was a good sort of push of start. So how we can create and establish the cold chain in Central Asia, because we are exporters of fresh goods, fresh food. And also this experience of the Global Alliance is very good to look at the organizational specifics of their operation, and we can adopt their experience in order to create similar structure in our region. Expansion of chambers of commerce, because these are some platforms which promote private public dialogue. There are committees also we're working together with. We also signed an agreement with Association of Global Silkway to expand our cooperation and get to neighboring countries to cooperate with business, not only to improve situation at the legal level or legislative level, but also looking for new contracts, new partners, new businesses. So the commercial element is also very important in our operation. Also, we work with the International Program of Professional Education of the Royal Institute of Logistics and Transport, which currently, so they provide, the training on the warehouse logistics and activity. It is done with our partner, with the support of our partners, which allowed us to they invited this institute, to cooperate with us. What are our further steps? What do we plan to do? So promote regional discussions, at the level of national committees on development of different solutions for transborder issues. And we hope that the mechanism, which is it is working already, maybe it's not finalized, the meetings of the regional national committees, but there will be a very good platform for resolving of all the existing issues for the expedited resolution, which would allow us to not only just simply get together, exchange the experience, but to create detailed sort of schedule with the regional flavor, which can be promoted at the national level and harmonized. And also promotion of the joint Central Asian priorities, access to information, digitalization of all procedures, expediting border procedures, and cooperation, business cooperation between members of this platform. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer them. I am grateful for everyone for the activity and support of our partnership, and hopefully we will expand more. Thank you. Thank you, Larissa. I would also like to thank you for your active involvement because as a chair of this partnership, you do a lot, put a lot of effort for this regional cooperation to actually happen. There is a trend now that private sector is more active in ready to cooperate at the regional level, and they're working very actively, and hopefully all their suggestions, proposals in regard of creating ties between national committees at the regional level will continue, and taken into consideration your suggestions and how a private sector sees it. We invited an expert, Mr. Pierre Bontenot, who is for more than 10 years working on the issues of the international trade, and he is a consultant, working as a consultant in 15 countries where this agreement is being implemented on the trade facilitation. And we would like to ask Pierre to share his vision on how this regional cooperation or how coordinated reforms in the sphere of trade facilitation in Central Asia could be implemented, and and which things should be taken into consideration for the future. Pierre, please.
Pierre, мы вас не слышим.
It's okay. Thank you very much, Azel. It's very hard to speak after the speaker before me, Ms. Kaslikova, because she absolutely impersonates what business should do when it comes to public-private dialogue. It is the absolute illustration of all the best practices that we try to convey when it comes to private sector role in public-private dialogue. within national trade facilitation committees or in other forums. So building upon her example, I will try to stress a few points that the ITC has come across in the past years when it comes to facilitating public-private dialogue in the area of trade facilitation. The first element that we should always keep in mind is that when business representatives decide to participate to public-private discussion, they have to renounce for some time to their business operation. So every time that a business comes in a National Trade Facilitation Committee meeting or any other public-private dialogue forum, they are making an arbitrage between their daily operations and contributing to the policymaking process. So in many countries, we've heard businesses feeling that the nature of the discussion in national trade facilitation committees were not of a nature that would really encourage them to participate in discussion, because they were too conceptual, potentially, because they were not sufficiently linked, this discussion within NTFC, they were not sufficiently linked with their concrete problems. So whenever we are talking about public-private dialogue, we need to make sure that the discussions that happens focus on concrete problems. And I think the speaker before really illustrated this, saying, stating what the concrete problems are on which she wants the PPD to happen. Multi-weight certificates, or certificates of weight not being recognized, very concrete problem. Finding new transit routes, very concrete problems. Improving information on border opening or closure during COVID-19, very concrete problems that directly affects business life. And all PPDs should always be structured around concrete problems. Similarly, the solution that should be brought should be as concrete as possible. And in my life working with NTFCs at national or regional level, sometimes I felt that the solutions that were proposed were a bit airy, or at least were not formulated in terms maybe that would really get the of the business community. Third point, PPD should display or should commit to achievable results. It's not always a good idea to aim for too big, because then you fail to achieve this result. And what I've very much appreciated in the past years within the Tajikistan National Trade Facilitation Committee is that the topics that were tabled for discussion, and with often being tabled by the private sector themselves, were topics where results could be achieved and could be achieved fairly rapidly. And this type of concrete problems with concrete solutions that can demonstrate impacts fairly rapidly are really what makes a PPD mechanism function effectively. And this is what encourages the business community to participate. Now, regional PPDs is of course an extremely a very good idea. Connecting NTFCs is absolutely key. Trade, by definition, involves two countries, international trade at least. And as such, there is an obvious need for countries to discuss among themselves to resolve the issues in relation with their trade. Now, again, this might sound obvious, but it's not always the case. Problems that are raised in regional forums or regional PD mechanism or regional national trade facilitation committee should be problems that cannot be solved exclusively at the domestic level. In some committees, I've heard just each country talking about their own reforms that they were doing at home, but that are very little to do with their neighboring countries. This is not really relevant. So it is important that regional NTFCs really focus on issues that cannot be solved at the domestic level. And here, I think we heard a few of these potential topics in the speech before me. The transit routes will, of course, cannot be solved domestically. This is, by definition, an issue to be discussed regionally. The crisis management with one country closing the border and the other country keeping the border open, this is also a great issue to be discussed at the regional level because it requires regional coordination. The weight certificates, again, the recognition of a certificate from one country to the other, this cannot be solved at the domestic level. So topics for regional PPD should be, as I mentioned, concrete problems with concrete solution, but they should also be problems that are meaningful to be discussed regionally. Issues brought to NTFC or to regional committees can also be topics where solutions are most effective if harmonized and coordinated across country. And here, one topic that we see in many regions being brought up on regional committee are, for example, the authorized operator scheme, where if all countries agree on the modality of this reform, then it becomes easily to establish mutual recognition agreement from one country to the other. Whereas a dispersed and fragmented approach would make it very difficult for the countries to then have a consistent approach to authorized operator. In the same spirit, I think the cold chain logistics example that was given before is also an example of solutions that are mostly coordinated. If you want to enter into PPDs with a very large alliance of maybe cold storage, it might be interesting to discuss this with other neighbors to make sure that the timing of creation of this cold storage will be coordinated so that there is no break in the cold storage logistics across the different routes within the region. Finally, the last aspect that is often relevant to brought in regional PPDs are best practices that can be replicated from one country to the other. For example, in West Africa, some countries shared with their peers in committees their achievement on advanced ruling mechanism, for example. And here there was a clear idea that country A could provide more information to country B on how to expedite the implementation of the reform. So PPD must be concrete. I mean, will be rooted in concrete problems, rooted in concrete issues. Regional PPD should be about regional issues. And when designing the agenda, it should, of course, be done in this way. Now, there are two possible strategies to define relevant areas for regional coordination and regional public-private dialogue. One is, I would say, the top-down strategy, and the other one is the bottom-up. The top-down strategy would entails identifying across all the countries in Central Asia what are those common policy-level priorities that they all have in common. The bottom-up approach is different, of course, in nature, is where the topics would come from the concrete obstacles faced by the businesses in their daily operation, very much like what has happened right now with Ms. Kaslikova sharing maybe 5 or 10 key topics, key obstacles that the business community is facing. To go into slightly more detail on these two strategies, the first strategy, the top-down strategy, has been used in several regional economic communities where each country had consolidated its level of compliance with the trade facilitation agreement. Now, the graph that you see is absolutely fictitious. I just came up with numbers. It doesn't reflect the reality. It is just an illustration of what other countries have done and how this could be applied in a region like Central Asia. So in this other region, what the country did is for each of the major trade facilitation reforms that are required under the TFA, each country assessed for itself first its level of compliance with the reform, whether it was fully operational, whether it was partially compliant, or whether there was absolutely no mechanism, no solutions existing on the ground. So each country would do this exercise, and I know that most of the countries in Central Asia have done this exercise for themselves already. And then you consolidate all these national findings at the regional level. And here it can bring several opportunities when you start consolidating these needs from the country. For example, if all the countries in the region have a common need to implement an authorized operator scheme, this creates a great opportunity for having a series of very specific discussion at the regional level on how we want this scheme to look like, what are the criteria that we want to include, etc., etc. In other cases, when some countries have not started the reform, but some other countries have already finalized the work, this creates very specific opportunities for experience sharing, asking those countries that are fully compliant, for example, in establishing a trade facilitation portal or internet publication, asking this country to share their practices and concrete support and concrete solutions to the countries that have still not engaged this work. Finally, this also helped to understand or identify these areas where maybe there is no need for the time being for coordination, so that we can just put the topic off the table and focus on more relevant things. For example, if in a region, most of the countries are already compliant and there is only one country that is still in the process of doing it, it is quite obvious that this should not be at the top of the agenda. So this is the top-down strategy. Now, the other strategy is, of course, to feed the agenda of regional coordination with practical issue identified on the ground. And again, here, I think the speech we heard before me is exactly about this. We heard that we need to work on multi-weight certificate between countries. We need to work on digitalization of transport documents accepted in the different countries. We need to work on cold chain. I'm sure we need to work on quality, the quality certificate recognition. We need to work on, border opening hours, etc., etc. So the other approach would be to look at what are the concrete, very operational problems of a regional nature that business face today within Central Asia, and take these problems that cannot be solved at the domestic level only and bring those to a regional committee where they could be addressed in a coordinated manner. Currently, ITC is working on a regional project in Central Asia covering many different components, and there is one component that very much goes into this direction. Under this component, we are working with national experts in each of the Central Asia countries to map the obstacles to trade on a list of bilateral trade flows. For example, what are the obstacles to trade for the export of wheat flour from Kazakhstan to Tajikistan? What are the concrete obstacles to trade for the export of dairy product from Kyrgyzstan to Kazakhstan? Looking at issues in relation with transport, logistics, weight certificates, quality registration, why not access to finance? Now, all these issues that we collect from the business community by asking them, interviewing them, and understanding how they operate on a daily basis, all these issues could be some material that could feed the discussion of a regional trade facilitation committee. And here I would like really to stress that ITC is more than open to work with any existing platform in Central Asia to table some of these issues and find common solution for the region, as we are very much open to work with existing networks of the private sector so that we can join force to find concrete solution to these concrete problems. Now, to conclude on public-private dialogue, whether at the regional level or at the national level, it is a shared responsibility. PPD only works if the policy or the government side and the private sector side are genuine in their desire to find common solution. And the first step towards this, and I know it's already happening to a large extent in this region, but the first step is that each side realize the constraint of the other side and understand that the other side's perspective is legitimate. So for example, the border agencies have a legitimate objective in enforcing controls at the border. They need to collect revenue, they need to protect the population from risks, from illicit trade, from illegal trade. They have a legitimate responsibility to do this. And the business community must always have this in mind when they interact with them. Similarly, border agencies and governments must understand that the business community has legitimate reason to ask for a simplified trade environment, because complexity drives cost, which drives profitability, which in turn negatively impact economic development, employment, poverty reduction, etc. So the first element is be mindful when you enter into PPD of the legitimate reasons and the legitimate objective of the person you're discussing with. And finally, there's just a few tips that all business representatives should have in mind. And clearly, Ms. Kaslikova has most of them in mind when she speaks. The first one is to organize yourself as a voice. And here, these regional networks that are created are a perfect illustration of what should be done. There is no point in coming into a too fragmented manner. The private sector must consolidate its position by working through associations, by building their position together before voicing them to the policymakers. The second element is the business should really make an effort not to stop at the symptoms of challenges. For example, if a business comes into an NTFC and say, I'm not happy with the time it takes to clear the goods, it takes too long. This is not an extremely constructive approach to the discussion. What would be interesting is to look at why is this delay too long? What is happening? What is the root cause of the problem that we're seeing? And of course, when you do so, be solution oriented, coming with not only problems, but potential alternatives to sort it out. And again, this is very much what we heard before with suggestion about public-private dialogue for cold chains, suggestion for digitalization of transport documentation, etc. 3, stay informed and substantiate your position. The businesses that engage in PPDs have a responsibility to know what's happening in the environment. They have a responsibility to stay updated with the current laws, regulation, administrative procedures that are enforced, to always be able to engage with the government at the same level of knowledge and, I would say, expertise. Second point linked to this is you need to substantiate your position, in the sense that everything that business say must always be backed up by facts, by evidence, by data. Otherwise, it becomes a perception discussion, which rarely leads to great outcome. Fourth point, participate for real in the consultative process. You cannot express your frustration with a PPD that is not functioning if yourself, as a business, are not committed to go there regularly, to contribute to the setting of the agenda, to contribute actively to the discussion during the meeting. And in many NTFCs across the world, I hear a lot of complaints from the business representative, but at the same time, I can witness that their level of engagement is sometimes a bit below par. Finally, if you want to engage in PPD as a business, you need to be sure that you're doing the right thing for yourself and making sure that you are compliant as a business with the rules and requirements of trade, making sure that your own internal systems are of the right integrity will give you much more power to discuss with government compared to a situation where potentially you would be, trying to find shortcuts in the way you deal with international trade. So to conclude, my key points here are PPD should be very practical to be effective, focusing on concrete solutions to concrete problems. Regional PPD should really focus on issues that are solved at the regional level and not just bringing national topics at the regional level. They must be really focused on issues that can only be solved at the regional level. There are two ways to achieve this: either a top-down approach by putting the common needs in the same basket, or a bottom-up approach by looking at those very practical challenges faced by businesses when they want to trade in Central Asia. Finally, for all this to work, there is a mindset change that is required, or a certain mindset that is required about being committed in the relationship and being open to hear the concerns of the other parties. On this note, I thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Пьер. Действительно,
Thank you, Pierre,
Вы
very much.
затронули
You did touch
очень
upon
важный
a
момент
very
взаимодействия
important
государственного
moment of
частного
interaction
диалога,
between the
что это
PPD, in the
ответственность и
PPD,
как
and this is a
государственного, так и
responsibility
частного
both on the part
сектора,
of both the
и
private and the public sector.
активное
And
участие должно быть
active involvement
постоянным, то
should
есть,
be ongoing, and it shouldn't be intermittent, it should be permanent. And I would also like to thank you for your recommendations, which may become the foundation and for the regional interaction, because today the national committees in Central Asia have already had an opportunity to meet. Could you please turn off the mic? Pierre, could you please turn off? All the speakers who do not speak, could you please turn off your mics? Thank you. And today, we've already seen 2 official meetings of national committees in Central Asia and TFCs, and the first one took place under the support of GIZ, and the second one as well, which took place in the February of last year, and the second one took place about 2 weeks ago in the beginning of November. And these 2 things that you just mentioned, they're very important, and we have to consider them in our discussions, and we need to interact on this. And with that regards, and with this, I would like to ask our next speaker, an international expert and consultant on international trade and trade facilitation, Ms. Birgit Viol. She is an expert and our consultant who also participated during the first 2 regional meetings of the national committees, and I would like to ask her to share her experience and her recommendations as to what needs to be done to strengthen regional interaction between these committees, between national committees, and what we should consider in the future when we work and support our partners on this. And of course, say a few words about active involvement of the private sector. Birgit, please, the floor is yours.
Giving me the floor, and hello to all of you. So I have the pleasure to speak after all my colleagues, and they have said so many important things that I can focus on one particular aspect. And that aspect is how to create, or what are our recommendations for creating a regional network of national trade facilitation committees in Central Asia. You have heard from all my previous speakers that they stress the importance of having a networking, of actually having a regional dialogue. On the private sector level, Larissa has shown us how effective private sector initiative at regional level can be in collecting data and providing this data in a very comprehensive manner to all the political decision makers. What we would like to focus on is what are our recommendations in order to build a network for the national trade facilitation committees in Central Asia. We're starting from the point that in 4 in 3 of the 4 countries, we do have national trade facilitation committees. And in Uzbekistan, we do have a trade facilitation working group under the WTO accession process. So we do have a national structure in place in 4 countries that is dealing with trade facilitation reforms and the implementation of the trade facilitation agreement. At the same time, we also heard already in the previous regional meeting that we have many regional projects and initiatives that are supported by different partners, such as the ITC, the OSCE, the GIZ, or the UN. So there is already a regional dynamic that these donor projects support. The GIZ regional project has organized in 2018 and 2020 2 regional meetings of national trade facilitation committees. And the objective was to exchange the progress on the WTO TFA implementation, to exchange on projects and development, and to share and discuss particular trade facilitation topics. In 2018, we focused on transparency. In 2020, it was more focused on transit. What we learned from these regional meetings is that the participation was very active and the feedback of the NTFCs that participated was positive. So there was a huge appreciation of having these regional meetings. And we also realized that there are already the private sector cross-border initiatives that create a positive regional dynamic. So this is the background for thinking about establishing a more robust mechanism for networking of these NTFCs. When we're talking of networking of NTFCs, we have to make clear that we are not talking about agency cooperation in the sense of mutual administrative assistance agreements, that we do not talk about regulatory cooperation. Here, we are really trying to establish a platform to promote trade facilitation dialogue and to strengthen trade facilitation in the region. And this platform can be a platform of national trade facilitation bodies and private sector inter-regional initiatives. Why could this regional platform be an advantage? Pierre has mentioned already many aspects why regional activity can contribute to trade facilitation implementation. But overall, if you look at trade facilitation and how trade facilitation is implemented, you will realize that trade facilitation is a systematic and conscious reform effort, and that it takes place in an innovative landscape. So a particular strong aspect of trade facilitation is knowledge and learning, because trade facilitation is improving, changing all the time, and there are new solutions that can be implemented. So knowledge and learning is key to trade facilitation. And in order to encourage this knowledge and learning, we do think that there's a need for a network landscape, and that there's a very good advantage of creating this landscape at regional level for private sector professionals and public sector officials. What are potential barriers for creating this network or platform of NTFCs? And what is the potential that we can obtain from creating such a network? The barriers is that in all countries, we do have different institutional setups. So we have to deal with different institutions, and we have to make sure that we integrate them all at the same level. Very often, countries in the region struggle themselves with having a very good functioning national trade facilitation committee. So if these national committees are not active, there's a lot of doubt whether we can actually make a regional committee active. And then there's also a question of too much workload and resource limitation. These national trade facilitation committees depend on private contributions, on public sector contributions, which is an additional workload. And Pierre has stressed, particularly the private sector officials, they have to make a choice between running the business or actually sitting in a meeting. So the workload and the resource limitation can be a really strong barrier for creating a strong network. And then we also notice that there is a lack of incentives for sharing and exploring. Although we do know that it would be good to learn and to talk to each other, we need to establish a landscape where there are real concrete results from this learning and this knowledge, so that they create strong incentives to actually come together. And then, of course, there's the resistance due to the DNA of interstate relations and traditional bureaucratic organization. It's already quite difficult at national level to achieve cross-government coordination. So now we're talking about cross-government coordination and dialogue across the border. We talk about collaboration with private sector, and this whole thing in a very difficult setup of interstate relations, which is not always easy to handle. The potentials are, however, quite big. So the platform for regional networking could have potentials in terms of, you can communicate and bring examples of your own projects and achievements in order for others to learn and to establish knowledge. You can establish a dialogue and reflection about your own practices. By listening to the presentations from other countries and other practitioners, you can reflect on what you are doing and whether you can improve. You can actually receive education in trade facilitation concept. As I said, trade facilitation is continuously improving, and you continuously have to improve and innovate. So you need to be updating your education and knowledge. You can optimize value by actually sharing and collaborating, and you can capitalize on a very good private sector dynamic in the region that Larissa has presented to us today. There are 4 aspects that would be very important to address when you want to create a regional network. It's you have to deal with the context, which means that you have to address the different frameworks in which these NTFCs operate in each country. You have to provide a very good and clear strategy, which is the content areas in which you want to create a network on. And these content areas need to be linked to the national goals in order to create a win-win situation. You need to create an organizational framework. There are different models for this organizational framework, and there are different tools that you can apply in order to get the network going. But you need to decide at one point what organizational model and framework you would like to put in place. And of course, you need to nurture and create the people and the culture for networking. And that involves that you need to create a culture of dialogue, of exchange, including virtual exchanges, and creating incentives for people to actually spend time and effort on this regional network. For the GIZ regional project, it is very important to strengthen this discussion about the regional network. And the roadmap is, or the vision for this regional network is to achieve a very high level of ownership and level of involvement over a set time frame of maybe 2 to 3 years. Currently, where we stand with the regional meetings that have been organized by GIZ, we see a low level of involvement and a low level of ownership by the NTFCs. And it would be the goal of GIZ and maybe also of the other donors active in this region to build on these achievements that have been achieved in the 2 last meetings and in these discussions now, and to move slowly up towards a self-managed mechanism whereby the NTFCs would have a network in place, would have a structure in place in order to share, would have the people and the culture in order to share, and would have a common strategy, what they would like to achieve. In order to get to this process, you need to start somewhere, but then you have an incremental process where you slowly add activities and slowly add responsibilities. So the initial focus would be to create regional meetings, whether virtual or face-to-face, on a regular basis. These meetings can be initiated by GIZ or by any other donor and can bring together all the different NTFCs. And then slowly these meetings should be self-managed and self-planned. So that means that the NTFCs bring to these meetings their topics they would like to discuss and frame the agenda together. In addition to these regional meetings, there can be consultations on selected topics that can be started. So these consultations could be maybe projects that are relevant in all countries. These could be projects that have a cross-border dimension or a bilateral collaboration dimension. And the consultations would have the focus on sharing the experience and learning from each other. In future, if this process creates a dialogue of or culture of dialogue, one could add the level of actually setting up joint working groups. Joint working groups would then maybe be in charge of regional projects or of monitoring regional issues. From there, the next step would be that there is the self-managed process whereby the NTFCs would have an organization in place and a structure in place to call for regular meetings, to have consultations going on, and to have sectoral working groups whenever needed. In this vision, it is planned that GIZ would like to assist building this regional network as long as the regional project is still going on. So the process of building the network would be assisted by GIZ, and other donors have already also expressed that they are willing to support this process of developing the network. But at the end, the vision is that the NTFCs would be capable of managing this network by themselves without continuous or regular support by any donor, whilst of course donors and projects can always provide ad hoc support in terms of input on expertise or sharing knowledge and capacity building. We do think, built on our experience in the region, that one of the key incentives to get the process going is to create incentives for the NTFCs to join, for the people of the private sector and the public officials to join. And we do think that the creating incentives is achieved by using this platform of regional meetings of NTFCs for knowledge sharing and capacity building in the first phase. So I think the vision of GIZ would be to encourage donors and other projects to use a regional approach to capacity building and knowledge sharing. This is from my side, the recommendations that GIZ would make based on the past achievements and how to go forward in building this regional network. And I will give the floor back to Asiel, who's managing the regional project.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you, Birgit. I would like to thank Birgit for the assistance she's providing us as an expert, the support which is always with us and is provided for us. Dear participants, I would like to pay your attention that we are, unfortunately, our panel session is coming to its completion and we don't have enough time, but I am reading the chat and there are no specific questions so far in our chat box, Q&A chat box. Maybe as a summary, there is a question to Paul Hansen. The question is to Paul. Could you please elaborate?
Facilitation reform tracker. How does it work? What solution does it bring? Paul, I think you see, right, the question. Yes?
Can I
Paul,
take
please?
the floor?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I believe the question is if I could elaborate on the TF reform tracker. How does it work and what solutions does it bring? So it is, as I mentioned, it is a new product that we are launching. We are right now piloting it in 2 countries. Basically, the way it is built right now in the pilot phase is that it provides the National Trade Facilitation Committee with an online tool, how they can collaborate within the National Trade Facilitation Committee with the organizations that are part of the committee on the implementation of either the WTO trade facilitation agreement or any regional trade facilitation agreement that they are working on. And it is divided in the sense that it subdivides on each obligation that the country has that the National Trade Facilitation Committee has to monitor. And remember, in the WTO TFA, one of the obligations of the NTFC is to monitor the implementation. With the reform tracker, as I said, you do it at the level of each obligation. So each sub-article where you are agreeing to implement the obligation. So for instance, if we take Article 1 of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, Article 1.1 stipulates that you have to make available a number of information that you can enter into the reform tracker as an activity. You can assign people in the various organizations to report on this, or to automate this electronically, have a working group set up exactly following this, and you can monitor the implementation rate, how the various organizations that are involved in this are reporting how much they have implemented. So we believe that this is a valuable tool for the national committees in order to have further capacity and knowledge on how to implement the various obligations that they have, either at international, regional, or national levels, and also in order to monitor and report on the implementation of trade facilitation. We also think that it gives the participants a better way of communicating, a more professional way of communicating, and therefore we firmly believe that this is a tool that national committees can use. As I said, I would be happy to discuss with any country or any committee that is interested, and we can see how we can possibly integrate that at the national level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. We have some comments, and the question, there's a question from Mr. Minjonov, who is representing State Customs Committee of Uzbekistan on gradual border crossing procedures. So which control measures could be simplified? Which measures can be, border measures can be simplified, basing it on the experience of other countries, and which are exact examples do exist? Birgit, can you please answer this question? Birgit, can you answer this question? Birgit, can you hear me? Can you hear us?
To this question, or it was?
I only read the question about whether the border crossing process procedures can be
that's exactly what the question is.
So it's a question we do get quite often, whether border crossing procedures can be harmonized and aligned, or whether there's a standard approach. Each border crossing procedures are different depending really on the border crossing setup, and also the type of goods and the type of custom procedures that you carry out on this border crossing. So it's not that you do have a standard mapping that you could apply from one border crossing to the other. But there are principles, and there are provisions that you can use in order to simplify. And these principles and provisions are in different international agreements, such as the UNECE agreement on the harmonization of border controls, in the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, and the WCO revised Kyoto Convention. So what you can do is you map your procedures at one border crossing point, and then you try to identify principles and provisions in these international conventions and instruments, and see how you can implement them in order to simplify. That is, I think, a better approach than trying to look at a different border crossing process in a totally different context and copy and paste to your context.
Thank you very much, Birgit. There was a comment that they were talking about border control, so passport control and so on. But we are not gonna raise or discuss this in great detail because we don't have time. We're limited in time, and we will have an opportunity to talk with Mr. Minzhonov, and you can consult with our experts, bilaterally. So there was a comment about transportation organization of dorsal shipments. And there was a suggestion from representatives of the private sector to discuss it at national committees. Thank you very much. We will do that. We will take this into consideration. Also, there was a comment about possibility to see the recorded panel discussion. And yes, that's you will have an opportunity to see a recorded panel session. You will be able to watch it at the end of the day at the forum site and YouTube links. Dear participants, I apologize, but we are over our panel session time frame, and I would like to summarize the results of our panel session. I would like to thank our speakers and our participants for active involvement. I think that today's discussion led us to a very important thing, that private public dialogue is important, and the private sector role is very important. And it's important not only for the sake of vocalizing, their problems, but to propose constructive solutions and recommendations on how the procedures can be facilitated. I would like to also say that we raised the issue of a need of regional cooperation, Central Asia, and in the context of the region, since we see that there is a desire and need, and the current situation with COVID demonstrates that interaction is needed, in all these problems which are being discussed have to be discussed at the regional level, take into consideration interests of all the countries of the region. I would like to thank you all that, and assure you that you see a lot of different international organizations and projects which are interested in supporting our region and partners in their initiatives. And then we will continue coordinating our activity as international organizations, and we and USAID and ITC and UNICTAD, UNICE, our goal is to jointly assist to see the result. So that is why our session demonstrates one more time that we do want to work together, and we are ready to support all the regional initiatives which have to do with the state, private sector dialogues, trade facilitation issues. And with that regard, I would like to assure you that both GIZ and our partners from other international organizations will continue working in this regard. Again, thank you. Thanks USAID for an opportunity to discuss this subject at this forum and discuss all these issues, because we see the importance of this topic, and we'll continue cooperating. And I would like to wish our colleagues effective, interesting continuation of the forum, and I hope that in the nearest future, these forums will be not only online, but we will get back to the previous formats, physical formats. I would like to thank you again, dear participants, for your participation, and panelists and partners. And I will be glad to see you and meet you again. Thank you. And I hope you liked today's panel session, and we will be able to cooperate with you later. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Спасибо, Ashley.